Bujugakanawia. Today I'm going to share a little bit about how to say the words for the 4 directions in the Ojibwe language and what those words literally mean. My name's Anton Troyer. I teach Ojibwe language, history, and culture. Thanks for watching today. So in the Ojibwe language, there is a belief within the culture that there are spirits in each of the 4 directions, and the words for those reflect a deeper understanding that is both physical as well as spiritual. So the word for east in the Ojibwe language is usually Waaban, and when people speak about a spirit in the east, they'll say Waabanong. So Manitu, Waabanong, like the spirit in the east. And Waaban means where the sun comes up. So it describes dawn. And of course here, this is where the sun comes up. And there's another word they'll sometimes use for east, Ningaabi'anong. It's actually just a participle form of the very same word. And it describes sunrise, or where the sun comes up. And in the Ojibwe world, most of our ceremonies start in the east. That's usually where the indoor is, and so forth, because that's seen as the dawn, where light comes from, and the beginning of all things. The next direction is south. And in Ojibwe, that word is Zhaawanong. And if you wanted to say in the south, you'd say Zhaawanong. If you wanted to say the spirit in the south, you'd say Manitu Zhaawanong. And Zhaawanong describes where the warmth comes from. So if you follow the path of the sun, goes from east to west, it tracks in the northern hemisphere across the southern sky. And so this is why a lot of times people will build their houses with a lot of windows that face the south, because you'll actually pick up a lot of ambient heat just from the sun constructing a house like that. So Zhaawanong is in the south. And by the way, if you follow the path of the sun from east to west, tracking across the southern half of the sky, this actually sets out a motion that is clockwise and helps describe why a lot of Ojibwe life ceremonies typically have people moving clockwise, either around the fire, the dance arbor at a powwow, or around the food when it's set up at a naming ceremony, or when we dance at a drum ceremony, typically in a clockwise fashion, like we are following the path of the sun. And then the next direction is Ningaabi'anong for west, and you would say Ningaabi'anong in the west, or Manitu Ningaabi'anong, the spirit in the west, when people are doing their prayers and so forth. And that means the opposite of east. It's where the sun sets. I have heard, although it's a little bit less common, Tom Stillday would sometimes refer to west as Ningaabi'anong and Ningaabi'anong, which actually has a slightly different meaning. In our area, the prevailing winds are from the west and northwest. So Ningaabi'anong would be like where the bad weather comes from. So if you get thunderstorms and things like that, that's the typical prevailing wind. That's a little more regionally specific and less common. The most common one would be Ningaabi'anong and Ningaabi'anong in the west. And then the final direction is north. And the Ojibwe word for that is Giiwedinong. And in the north, Giiwedinong, spirit in the north, Manitu Giiwedinong. So Giiwe in the Ojibwe language means to go home, and Giiwedinong in the north would mean like the homeland. So there's kind of a yin and yang type thing where the path of the sun goes east to west, tracking through the southern part of the sky sets up the clockwise motion, and the road of souls, when we pass away, goes west straight. So when we're doing funeral instructions, we're sending the spirit out in a westerly direction. But this is kind of reflected a little bit in the word for north as well, where it's called the homeland. So on the north sky, you have the ether trail of the footprints of our ancestors that traveled to the spirit world. So when somebody leaves, passes away, they don't really die, they just change worlds. And this is kind of reflected in the word Giiwedinong for north. It's like homeland, where the ancestors have, once they've completed their cycle, and go on to the next world. Those are the words for the 4 directions. It's probably also worth mentioning that in the Ojibwe worldview, there is a common creator, a great spirit that made all things and all beings. But just as happens like when human beings become parents and bring a child into the world, that child can grow up and advise us. And so I think as the Great Spirit made other spirits and placed them around and amongst us, that these spirits too had their own power, energy, and so forth. So when we do ceremonies, we will invoke and send offerings to the Great Spirit, but also to Mother Earth and the spirits in the 4 directions, in the wind, and so forth. And there are many others too, in the water. We mention animals, birds, and so forth. But collectively, there's a spiritual power in all things, and it's our belief that we are not the masters of the web of life. We are just part of the web of life, and we see the power in each human being, the spiritual power in each human being, and the spiritual power in all these other spirits, and even the animals, birds, and so forth, all around and amongst us. Miigwech.